How to read a sentence. What a stupid video. I learned to read a sentence in the 3rd grade. Do you know how to read? Well, do you know how to cook, drive, dress, ride a bike? Of course you say. But wait, I say, it depends on what we mean by cooking, driving, dressing, or riding a bike. Do we mean baking an elaborate wedding cake? Driving a race car? Dressing for a grand ball? Riding your bike on the wall? Well, if we mean those things, the answer to the question might be no, I probably don't know how to do these things. So, do you know how to read? Well, it depends upon what we're talking about. Reading is not reading. Reading a Harry Potter book is not the same as reading a college textbook, which is not the same as reading a scholarly article. These are different types and levels of reading, and the ways that you have read in the past may not be sufficient for how you'll need to read in the present. So, let's talk about how to read a sentence. How to read a sentence hermeneutically. So, point 1. Reading a sentence does not mean decoding the words. You could read a whole bunch of words without reading a sentence. That's because reading a sentence means understanding the meaning of what is being written. That takes effort. Point 2. You can't understand the meaning of a sentence by focusing only on the sentence. You have to understand how the sentence fits into the larger whole, how the sentence fits into the larger paragraph, section, article, or what have you. So, take a look. The meaning of this sentence cannot be discerned by looking at that sentence alone. It depends upon the meaning of the preceding sentence and the sentences preceding that, and indeed, it depends upon the title or the heading as well. You can't understand a sentence all by itself. You must move forward and move backward and continuously update your understanding of what you're reading. So this is hermeneutic reading. Does it sound familiar? We have a sentence. The sentences make up the paragraph, and the paragraph informs and structures the meaning of the sentence. So, how to read a sentence. 4 steps. Step 1. Read the sentence or unit word by word until you get to the end of the sentence. 2. Translate the sentence into your own words. Even write it down. You can't be said to understand the sentence unless you can express it in your own words. 3. You're not done yet. Check your translation against the original sentence itself. Ask yourself, are there any important ideas in the sentence that are not in your translation? If so, update your translation until the core meaning of the sentence is exhausted, until everything is in your translation that is important in your sentence. You must be able to state the sentence in your own words, or you don't understand it. And you'll be surprised sometimes how difficult it is to translate even the simplest sentences. So, let's restate this. Step 1, read the unit word by word until you get to the end of the unit, a sentence for example. Then step 2, translate the meaning of the unit into your own words. Check the meaning of your translation against the original sentence, and update your translation if you need to. Here's an example. Here's the sentence. 7 years ago our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, you look at that and you say, I understand it. Well, do you understand it? Can you translate it into your own words? And especially, can you translate it into your own words without looking? Then you could be said to really understand it. Let's translate it. First round. The United States was founded upon the idea that people should have freedom and equality. Does that translation map onto the original? Does it explain? Does it translate the meaning of the original? Well, let's check. Let's look at it. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth unto this nation a new continent, a new nation, conceived in liberty. So, The nation that was brought forth is the United States. It was founded on liberty, which is the same as freedom. See how I translated it? And dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal and equality. So I've got the nation, the liberty, I've changed that into my own words. Equal, I've changed it in my own words. Is anything else important in that sentence that's not in my translation? Well, what about this 77 years ago? I mean, ordinarily, I would think that would be such an important thing to include. But what do we do know that the Gettysburg Address is quoted all the time, and 77 years ago may actually be important. Let's translate it. What does that mean? Well, it means in 1776, 87 years before the address was written in 1863. Now look at what we've learned just by looking at that. We've learned that the Gettysburg Address was written in 1863, which is 87 years after 1776, which is the birth of the nation. That's what it would mean to translate a sentence. That's what it means to read a sentence. It's not simply putting your eyes over the words. It's comprehending the words in your own words, checking it against the original, and continuing to go through this process back and forth, until you content that you do understand the sentence. We call this iterative reading. Iterative means to perform repeatedly, and what you're performing repeatedly is the act of going back and monitoring your understanding over and over again. You read and monitor, read and monitor, read and monitor, go back and forth. So let's give this a try. Let's start with the first chapter of Dweck's Mindset. Let's actually go through and do this. So, where shall we start the process of iterative reading and translating? Let's start. Should we start here? No. We shouldn't start there. That's not the beginning. The beginning is the title. Don't assume that the title is irrelevant or that its meaning is obvious. It is not. Even an apparently simple title like The Mindsets. The title is deeply important. It tells you what the chapter is about, and it may even allude to the main point of the chapter. Ignore the chapter heading or the title at your peril. Seriously. We'll talk more about this later. So let's give it a try again. Where do we begin? Well, yes, we did begin with the title, and maybe even before the title. Title on the front page or the back page or what have you. So what do? No, we don't just move on. We translate it. What, you say? Translate something so simple, something so stupid into my own words? Yes. Read the unit. Step 1. 2. Translate. What's a mindset? Got to ask yourself that question. What's a mindset? A mindset. Mindset is a way of thinking, you might say. It's pretty good translation. Let's check it against the original. Is there anything in the original that's not in my translation? Well, mindsets are a way of thinking, I said, but mindset. I don't have mindset in my translation. Mind and set. What could that mean? How your mind is set up? How your mind sets you up to see something? That would be a good update. A mindset is a way of thinking. It's how your mind sets you up to see something. Now look at that. What would happen if we simply skipped over the title, didn't do any of this? First of all, we wouldn't know what the chapter's about, and we wouldn't have learned all of this, at least tentative stuff that we've now learned. We haven't read a word yet of the actual text, but we have already got a sense of what this chapter is going to be about: ways of thinking and perhaps how your mind sets up your thinking. Let's move forward. This is your final translation of the title. First sentence. When I was a young researcher just starting out, something happened that changed my life. Yes, translate it. At least until you get to be good at it, you got to translate it. Read the unit. Translate it. As a young scientist, the author experienced a life-changing event. Note how I did it. She said as a young researcher, I put as a young scientist. Just starting out, something is not so important. Something happened that changed my life. The author experienced a life-changing event. Is there anything in the original that's important that's not in my translation? Nope. The translation looks pretty good. Let's move on. I was obsessed with understanding how people cope with failures, and I decided to study it by watching how students grapple with hard problems. Read the unit, translate. Now, translate that sentence. Especially can you translate it without looking at it. If you can understand it. It's a little bit harder. How do we translate it? To study how people adapt emotionally to failure, I was obsessed with understanding how people cope with failure. How do we translate the word cope with failure? I translated it as adapt emotionally. Now you have a clearer understanding what the word cope means. With failure, I decided to study it. Study what? How people cope with failure by watching how students grapple with hard problems. To study how people adapt emotionally to failure, she studied how people coped with difficult tasks. I took grapple and I changed it to cope, and hard problems I put difficult tasks. I put it into my own words. Is there anything in the original that's not in my translation? Nope. Looks pretty good to me. Nothing in there that's central. I could say, well, I was obsessed is not in there. Well, that's not really important. I decided to study. Well, that's not terribly important. I think we're in a good place. Read the next unit. So I brought children one at a time. I brought children one at a time into a room in their school, made them comfortable, and gave them a series of puzzles to solve. Translation. She watched children as they tried to solve a series of puzzles. She watched children as they tried to perform a series of tasks that would be even better than solve a series of puzzles, because solve a series of puzzles is right there, or at least a series of puzzles is. Anything in the original that's not in the translation? What about this? The word so. Is that important? Ordinarily you'd say no. So isn't important. So is just a word, a connection word. But wait a minute. The word so has a function. It ties this to the previous sentence. The word so brings information from before. So I brought children one at a time into the room, made them comfortable, and gave them a series of puzzles to solve. The word so says she does this for a particular purpose. Maybe so is important. In order to see how children coped with failure, that's the previous part, she watched children as they tried to solve a series of puzzles. Okay? By adding that explicitly to my translation, I connected this to what came before, and now I have a clearer understanding of what's going on. Next sentence. The first what? First puzzles. The first ones were fairly easy, but the next ones were hard. Translation. The first puzzles were easy, but the later puzzles were more difficult. Put it into my own words. Now, the first ones were hard. What if I wrote the first ones were hard? I wouldn't know what the word ones referred to. The word ones refers to something that came before. Check it. Is it anything in the original not in my translation? Looks good to me. Let's move forward. As the students grunted, perspired, and toiled, I watched their strategies and probed what they were thinking and feeling. It's actually a pretty complicated sentence. She observed the children and asked what they were experiencing, I wrote. As the students grunted, perspired, and toiled, I watched. She observed, I put the word observed, the children and asked what they were experiencing. What they were experiencing, that was my words for thinking and feeling. She asked what they were experiencing and observed the children. They observed the strategies and probed what they were thinking and experiencing. Is there anything in the original not in my translation? Well, yes, actually. This business of grunting and perspiring and toiling, is that important? Is that just fancy language? Actually, I think it means something. What that means is she watched the strategies and probed what they were thinking and feeling when they were, what is grunting, perspiring, and toiling? Working hard. Maybe even being anxious, maybe, being worried about whether they're going to be able to cope with failure. So grunting, perspiring, and toiling may be important. As the children struggled with the puzzles. Look, all I did was I said, as the children struggled. I took all this, didn't put grunted, perspired, and toiled. That's all struggling. As the child struggled with the puzzles, she observed the children and asked what they were experiencing. Having a much clearer understanding of that now. I expected differences among the children and how they coped with difficulty, but I saw something I never expected. Read it, translate it. She thought that the children would differ in how they dealt with hard puzzles, but something happened that she really didn't expect. And that's okay. So I've gone through I've read each sentence. I've translated them. I should have a much clearer understanding of what this means. What's the next step? But before we do, note the hermeneutic circle. Each one of these, you're going to see a hermeneutic circle. We go. We read, translate, check back, update. Read, translate, check back, update. Read, translate, check back, update. Read, translate, check back, update, and so forth. That's the hermeneutic circle, always monitoring, going back. Monitor your understanding. And if I don't get it, I keep trying to understand it. So, what did you notice? Why is this hermeneutic? I just told you. We did not start from the beginning and read straight through to the end. We went forward and backward and forward and backward. We stopped to explicitly reflect on the meaning of what was being written, and that is the translation. The stopping and reflecting is the translation. After we reflected on the meaning, we went backward again to make sure that we understood the meaning, and if we didn't, we updated the meaning, either on paper or in our heads. Why is this important? We often think of reading as just decoding. It's not. It's understanding. You don't stop reading until you understand. To monitor your understanding is the most important thing you can do when you're reading. If you don't know if you're not understanding, and you'll just keep going. You don't know if you understand something unless you're able to reflect on it and put it into your own words. Yes, I know you don't believe me. I know you think that, oh my goodness, I understand it. I just can't put it into words. How many times have you said that? I get it. I just can't tell you what it is. I can't just put it into words. Well, it's words we use to understand something. To understand something implicitly, to understand it or have the feeling of understanding simply isn't enough. You've got to be able to explain it in your own words. That is the criterion. And I encourage you to use that criterion in your reading. If you can't put it into your own words, you don't understand it clearly enough. You don't know if you have it right until you check back and monitor your understanding. Now, what you're likely thinking right now. Are you telling me that I have to do this for every sentence? That would take forever. You're out of your mind. I'm going to ignore you because you're obviously out of touch. That's probably what you're thinking right now. And the answer is yes, that is exactly what I'm telling you. That's what good readers do. And if you're not yet doing this, don't blame the messenger. Actually, there's more. It's going to get harder before it gets easier. But there's a silver lining. Over time, you won't have to go through this process in a deliberate way each time. Over time, with practice, it'll become automatic and effortless. You won't even know you're doing it. It's like riding a bike. When you're riding a bike the first time, it's painful and difficult. Now you can do it automatically. But you've got to put that work in before, and you've got to make it automatic before it stops being hard. First, it's going to be hard and tedious, but that's what has to happen. Okay, thanks so much.